In the heart of the city, a once prosperous woman named Eliza walked with grace, her world filled with light, status, and certainty. A cruel twist of fate, an accident that left her blind, dimmed everything. She was cast into darkness, now unseen and underestimated. People whispered, judged, and dismissed Eliza as fragile. None imagined hope would come from Jamal, a poor black orphan who survived by selling flowers on the street. His days were shaped by hardship and resilience, yet Jamal, a child with nothing but resourcefulness and grit, would teach Eliza, a woman, who had lost everything familiar, more than anyone could have believed. We draw the contours of her world, the sudden darkness, the sting of social stigma, and the ache of silent sorrow. Threads of injustice, classism, racism, ableism run beneath the surface, inviting curiosity to linger. She had once been the jewel of every ballroom, admired for her beauty and envied for her grace. The accident stole not only her sight, but also the way the world saw her. Once greeted with smiles, she was now met with pity, or worse, silence. The woman who once commanded rooms now felt invisible in them. Every step through the streets was a reminder of her fragility. She could hear the clipped laughter of strangers, the whispers that followed her cane tapping against the cobblestone. She had everything once, they would murmur. Now look at her. Behind those whispers lay something harsher. Exclusion. Doors once open to her now remained shut. Invitations stopped. Friends disappeared. The glittering circles she had belonged to had no room for imperfection. Society treated her blindness not as a condition, but as a reason to erase her existence. It was in those shadows of rejection that she encountered him. A boy, no older than 10, is standing barefoot on the street corner. His clothes hung loose, his hands bruised from work, and in his basket were wilted flowers he tried to sell to passers-by. People brushed past him as though he were invisible. Yet he stood with quiet dignity, and it was his voice, soft and hesitant, that reached her first. Offering not pity, not charity, but a flower, a single, fragile bloom. What could possibly connect a fallen socialite and a forgotten orphan? Their worlds could not have been further apart, and yet, in that moment, something began. A story of injustice, survival, and the hidden beauty that could still be found, even in darkness. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of silence for her, lonely breakfasts, long walks through streets where her presence was acknowledged only with pity. But every afternoon, there was a voice, gentle and steady, waiting at the corner. The boy. His basket of flowers never seemed to grow lighter. Few ever stopped, and those who did often sneered at his skin, his ragged clothes, the grime of survival on his hands. Many offered coins instead of buying his blooms, as though charity was all he was worth. But he refused their coins. He insisted on trading flowers, not begging for pity. It intrigued her. One morning, she paused when she heard the shuffle of his feet and the faint rustle of petals. His voice trembled but carried something unbreakable. "Would you like to feel the roses today? They're soft, almost like silk." Her fingers, hesitant, brushed against the bloom he placed in her palm. She felt the velvet of its petals, inhaled the faint sweetness that seemed to bloom against the weight of city dust. It was not sight she received that day, but something else. A reminder that beauty could still reach her through other senses. But as their unlikely bond began to grow, so did the whispers. "Imagine," she overheard one woman hiss, "a blind socialite reduced to taking flowers from a street urchin." "She's lost her mind," another voice sneered. "Or maybe she's just desperate for attention." The cruelty was not subtle. Invitations that had once trickled back never came again. Shopkeepers who had once greeted her warmly now looked past her with irritation when she lingered with the boy. Yet the boy seemed to understand. When she faltered, when the weight of shame pressed against her chest, he would simply place a flower in her hand. No speeches, no explanations, just silent defiance, and beneath his quiet dignity was a pain she began to sense. On evenings when his basket remained full, she heard his stomach growl faintly. When the winds grew colder, she felt the tremor in his hands. He spoke little of his past, but she pieced it together. No parents, no home, no protection, only the streets and his stubborn refusal to beg. But in him, she found resilience. One day, the cruelty reached its peak. As she stood by his side, touching the daisies he described, a group of wealthy passers-by halted. She recognized their voices, men and women who once raised champagne glasses in her honor. Look at her now, one man laughed cruelly, from silk gowns to holding weeds from a beggar boy. The laughter stung sharper than any blade. She felt her cheeks burn. For a moment, she wanted to let go of the flower, to retreat into the shadows where she could not be mocked. But then, the boy's hand, small and trembling, pressed hers firmly around the bloom. His voice, soft but steady, whispered, "They only see weeds, but you can still feel the garden." And in that moment, something shifted. The pity that had chained her began to transform, not into anger, but into defiance. This bond was no accident. Fate had placed him in her path not to remind her of her loss, but to reveal a strength that sight had once blinded her from. The night of the grand charity gala arrived, an event she once would have attended with grace and dazzling gowns. This time she stayed home, her world sealed in quiet darkness. But fate had other plans. A sharp knock rattled her door. When she opened it, faint floral fragrance rushed in. The boy stood there, shivering, his basket half empty, his clothes wet from rain. In his hand, however, was not a single rose or daisy, but an entire bundle of wildflowers, tangled yet alive. "I thought," he whispered, hesitant, "maybe the world should come to you tonight." Her chest ached. She wanted to thank him, but before words could form, loud laughter echoed down the street. A group of gala guests, polished, jeweled, smug, were stepping from their shining carriages, heading into the glowing hall across the way. And they saw her. They saw her standing in her doorway, clutching wildflowers from a ragged black boy. Gasps turned to cruel chuckles. "Look at her," a woman sneered, voice sharp enough to slice. "Blind and desperate, holding weeds from the gutter." A man added with mocking pity, "How the mighty have fallen, from ballroom diamonds to a street beggar's hand." The words cut deeper than she could bear. For a heartbeat, shame pressed her down, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to retreat, to close the door, to vanish into silence. But then the boy stepped forward. His tiny frame stood between her and the glittering cruelty of the guests. His voice, trembling yet unbroken, rang through the night. "They see weeds, but these are not weeds. They grow through stone, through dirt, through a world that tries to crush them. Just like me, just like her. We are not weeds. We are proof that beauty survives." The crowd gasped, not with admiration, but with fury. Some laughed louder, others spat cruel remarks. Yet in the tension of that moment, something undeniable pulsed. Truth. She felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from awakening. The shame that once chained her heart shattered. For the first time since the darkness fell upon her world, she stood taller. Her hand, clutching the wildflowers, did not tremble. And in that defiant silence, surrounded by ridicule, a bond between the broken turned into something unbreakable. For a moment, silence stretched like a taut string. Then she lifted her head, feeling the night air brush her face. The laughter of the gala guests no longer cut her. It slid off her like water on stone. She realized something profound. The world might see her blindness, her struggles, her solitude, but she had something they could never take. Vision beyond sight. She inhaled the scent of the wildflowers, their stubborn fragrance filling the dark night. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Not the quiet, polite smile of someone hiding, but a smile that radiated strength. The boy beside her mirrored it, small but unyielding, and together they stood, alive and unbroken. And then, slowly, a change rippled through her. The darkness that had once confined her became a canvas. Each sound, the distant music of the gala, the rain dripping from leaves, the boy's steady breathing, painted a world she could feel and shape. She understood now that beauty did not live only in chandeliers or polished gowns. Beauty grew in resilience, in courage, in the defiance of those who refused to be crushed. The guests, sensing that their mockery had no power here, began to retreat, their cruel words swallowed by the night. She didn't chase them. She didn't need to. Her victory was not in proving them wrong, it was in claiming herself, in standing fully, unapologetically, in the life she had. Later, as the city lights shimmered across wet streets, she walked with the boy through the quiet avenues. Every step was a testament. Even in darkness, one can create light. Even in silence, one can make their voice heard. The wildflowers in her hands were no longer weeds. They were symbols of defiance, of life, of hope that refuses to be dimmed. By the time dawn broke, she had rewritten her story. Not as a victim of circumstance, not as someone to be pitied, but as a woman who sees more than eyes can capture, who moves through the world with courage, and who inspires others to rise, even when the night seems endless. In the end, the blind woman was no longer invisible. She had become a force, a living proof that strength, love, and resilience grow where others see only obstacles, and that truth, like the wildflowers in her hands, would endure.